How are we doing today, guys? Today we're going to be talking about the handstand push-up and some variations to build up to that. So we're going to talk about concepts first, and then we're going to be talking through a strict movement, and then we're going to talk through the kipping action, all the way obviously full range. Now obviously in terms of ranges, all of these movements can be done at lesser range or increased range. So if I was doing lesser range, for example, if I have my hands obviously on the mat here, I would be then placing a plate with an ab mat or something similar to that on in between my hands to allow my head to come to, so that's reducing the range of motion. If I wanted to increase the range of motion, I'd place a plate or something similar on either side and still come down to the mat each time, increasing my range of motion. So every single variation of these, right from this box variation all the way through to strict and kipping, can be done through different ranges of motion. The trick is just to use the one that's most relevant for you. And that's quite a specific thing, or quite a good way of both progressing and regressing the movement. So first thing we're going to talk about is the setup. So in terms of hand position, big thing that we want to think about first is stacking, getting our hands in the correct shape. So in terms of correct shape, we don't necessarily want to be straight in line with shoulders, we actually want to be slightly wider. What this is going to allow for is the upper arm to be able to sit out to the side of the body and still allow us to create a vertical forearm, which is our strongest pressing point for going overhead. So if we want to be able to create a strong press, particularly when we're talking about strict variations, we want to be thinking about getting that forearm vertical, which means the hand must be outside the shoulder. So that's the first thing to begin with. Quite often we have people too wide or too narrow, and that goes for too wide as well. So CrossFit, there are rules around how wide you can go. Obviously smaller people, you're not really likely to get anywhere near that, but taller people, you may actually be in an inefficient position, particularly if you've got long limbs. But again, in terms of learning the movement, forget the CrossFit rules and just focus on your shapes. So what we want to be thinking about, like I said, is creating a stack or external rotation through the shoulder to allow you to get that forearm vertical as you're sitting at the bottom of that rep. And that should be the cue for where your hands are. And most people, it will either be, generally, most people get close to it, but film yourself from front on and see where those forearms are sitting, and also side on, because when I say vertical, I mean it's vertical in all meanings, in terms of it wants to be vertical here and it wants to be vertical here. If you're not sitting vertical all the way through, you're not driving that forearm into the ground, and you're not pressing as strongly as you could. So hands are set into a vertical forearm position. From there, we want to be thinking about creating a pointer finger that's pointing towards the wall, and then spreading your fingers out from that point. We don't want to be going too far in, because then it's going to flare the elbows out, but we don't want to be going too far wide, because then you're utilizing much less pec and much less actual shoulder musculature to drive yourself into the ground. Now there are some people who will go really, really wide and they'll have these splayed hands to get themselves reps. It's not really going to translate very well to a lot of your, particularly like deficit handstand push-ups. So people who do a lot of that typically struggle a little bit more when they're going into deficits, because you're having to travel past that range of motion where you're strong in that position. So try to get used to having the pointer forwards. It'll be better for you in the long run. From there, spread the fingers. Now you want to be thinking about gripping the floor. Now if I grip the wall here, by that I'm meaning I'm creating an arc up. So my knuckles here are actually coming off the wall. That gripping of the floor allows you to create an arch in a similar way through the fingers to what your feet have. And this allows you to create quite a fair bit of pressure and control in the actual hands. Now this is quite relevant for handstand walks and handstand, step variations, building up to that. So it's a good habit to learn kind of here. Obviously where you've got the wall, you're in contact with the wall the whole time, but it's not going to necessarily progress you to being able to go to like freestanding, for example, freestanding handstand push-ups, particularly since they've been introduced into competitions, if you don't have that control there. So I highly recommend learning to grip the floor with the fingers from now. In terms of where you want to be putting your weight, across the knuckles is where you want to be sitting. That way you get a little bit of weight to put pressure forwards and a little bit of pressure towards the heels, and gradually learning how to understand that. Again, more relevant for your handstand walks, but again, good thing to kind of learn as you gradually build up. What we're trying to look for in our positions is our top position and our bottom position. So our bottom position is a tripod. By that I mean what I'm looking for if I come into the wall is I'm looking for creating a tripod from my wrist point to the top of my head, which will be up higher, and then obviously triangle to the other wrist. So my head will be sitting between my fingertips, which means I'll be able to see my forearms in my peripheral vision. I won't be here because I can't see my forearms in that peripheral vision, but also that messes up my, what should we call it, vertical forearms or parallel forearms. So top of the head should be touching right in between the fingertips with the center of the head. This is going to allow you to create a tripod. That tripod action mimics your barbell shapes, which means you're strengthening them as you've been strengthening all your barbell work. So that's your bottom position. Your top position is going to be dictated by creating internal rotation, which if you've seen our shoulder press video, we'll talk about that, about creating a stack. So where a lot of people go is they go here. That's not lockout. There's no shoulder lockout here. It's not going to benefit you in terms of strength, and it's not going to teach you anything. So think about creating internal rotation and elevation. It means the shoulder will elevate slightly. It'll mean that it'll push the ribcage through, and it'll create flexion of the upper back, not extension, which is where a lot of people get caught, particularly in the kipping variations. Flexion, which will allow you to create compression, which again ties in significantly better to handstand walks. So we talk about, as we've talked about in a few of our other videos, we're all about creating progression. You want to create positions with the basic movements so that you can progress further and further and further into those next positions. So at lockout, we want locked out quads, locked out hips, rib cage is pulled down, which is also at the bottom position as well, because you shouldn't be shifting too much. From there, you want to create elevation through the shoulder and lockout and flexion, compression at the top of the rep. And that's going to allow you to create that stacking position at the top. So we want to move from the bottom position to the top position. How we do that? We're talking about creating a lock. So most people will start in obviously a locked out position at the top of the rep if I kicked into that wall. From there, I'm going to create a break at the elbow, which is going to allow me to create external rotation through the shoulder. From there, it's going to allow me to keep my elbow forwards and create this vertical forearm to allow myself to tap my head on the ground, to then press back up in the same pattern and lock out at the top. So the reason for creating that forwards action and creating the elbow forwards means that we can utilize pecs, we can utilize the deltoids, we can utilize the triceps and even lats to start to stabilize that shoulder and create a leverage point. If you're just here, it makes it very, very hard for things like pecs and things like that to get involved. So you're going to be a lot better off and have a stronger press to move in there. Other thing it does is it also reduces the amount of work that you have to, or load that you have to go through at any particular one time. Because it means that the torso is actually traveling in a diagonal action. This diagonal action means that you're actually reducing the amount of force that you have to produce at any one point versus traveling straight up and down. And that allows you to use a little bit of horizontal movement to actually keep the body moving, to allow you to get back up into that lockout shape, particularly when you're tired and particularly when you're under fatigue. So how we develop that? First movement is working it off a box, just to simply get the understanding of the position and build that shape. From there, we'll kick up into the wall, and I'll talk you through the kick up in a second. Now, getting onto the box can be a little bit ungraceful. Easiest way, lie down on top of your box, slide yourself forwards, get your hands onto the floor. From there, you're just outside shoulders, pointers are pointing forwards. From there, I'm spreading my hands out and I'm locking into the ground by pushing into the ground. From there, I'm going to shuffle my knees up. Obviously, you can do this on the knees and on the toes. I'm going to do it on the knees because of how the box is orientated. Just space my feet. From there, I'm going to come down, I'm going to tap my head into that triangle shape. Now, from there, I'm going to actually shuffle my knees forward. That way I get a slightly better stack and allows me to hollow a little bit more. From there, my forearms are vertical. I'm going to press into the ground and drive myself into full lockout. Back down, tap on the ground, drive myself to full lockout. In terms of getting down, obviously shuffle the legs back the other way. And the easiest way is to step off to the side. That way you have that control. Again, not necessarily the most graceful movement, but really, really good for just developing that understanding. Now, you see how I had to shift my knees forwards at the top there? Just to get myself stacked a little bit better over the top of my hands. Ideally, you want to create that stack quite well. Quite often people will have their knees too far back and have way too big an angle on their body. We want to try and create a nice vertical position just for good habits as you build up. So what we want to build to is obviously doing that at ideally full range into a full kipping, or into a full strict movement. The positions are all exactly the same, nothing changes. Only thing here is that you actually have to kick yourself up into a handstand. Now, how we kick ourselves up into a handstand? What you really want to be thinking about here is thinking about getting the first foot to the wall and starting to understand how to pivot and rotate through the shoulder. So as I push into the ground here, if I set myself, in terms of how far you come to and from the wall, depends on how thick your body is. Some people who are quite small and thin typically need to be a little bit closer and will feel more comfortable there. I've got quite thick rib cage and hips, which means I need to sit further away. It is entirely person dependent, so find what feels comfortable. Now, in terms of the pivoting, we want to be thinking about creating a pivot so that when you kick up, your shoulder rotates and the head starts to come through. This allows you to stack on top of your arms. Where people go wrong quite often when they kick up is they kick forwards. And it means that they're actually pushing themselves this way and then trying to compensate and roll in underneath. Makes it significantly harder to obviously get themselves up into the top. So what we want to be thinking about here is understanding the kick up and the difference between a bounce and a kick to get yourself on top. Now by bounce and kick, what I'm referring to is the combination of movements that your legs will do. So I'm going to press into the ground. Really, really important, lock your elbows. Because when you start to bend, you'll find that absorbs all the force from your legs and you're not going to pivot. So press into the ground. From there, I'm going to get nice and close to the wall because that means I'm already kind of stacked vertically. From there, I'm going to use one leg, doesn't matter which one. I'm going to kick and then I'm going to bounce. And that's going to allow me to get up to the wall. If you're doing this for the first time, don't try and actually kick up. Just try and tap the wall and bounce straight back down. So kick up, tap, straight back down. That's going to allow you to just get used to pivoting to create that movement. Next step is to be able to tap both feet on the wall. So if I go into the exact same movement again, tap, tap, and straight back down again. Again, gets you used to the feeling, gets you used to the sensation, gets you used to creating the movement. Once you get both feet on the wall, then you need to lengthen, because obviously I have my knees bent there, and you'll find that as soon as you get the first foot to the wall, it's actually quite easy to get the second foot to the wall. So if I go again, all the same positions, if I kick up, lengthen, it's easy to get the second foot to the wall once you've got the first foot to the wall. So that's your kick up. Final thing is obviously start to move into the actual press itself. So from that top position, I'm going to make sure I'm in my lockout. From there, I'm going to break at the elbow. I'm going to control down. I'm going to gently tap my head, and then I'm going to press all the way back out again. Obviously, working to create the tripod down the bottom and the big lockout and vertical positions at the top, keeping the body nice long and tight as you go through. Now, staying long and tight, I will mention here, is quite crucial, because if you go to press and the first thing that happens is big shift in hips or ribs or anywhere else, means that that press action hasn't actually gone to driving you upwards, it's gone into driving your hips or ribs away. And that means that that force has just been wasted. And what it typically means is that your body is trying to find a stable position to press into. And where it feels more stable is to kind of end range something, sit in end range, and then drive through that position. If we can, we want to avoid that, and we want to teach ourselves to create strength in that stacked position, because ultimately, again, it's going to create better pathways, and it's going to lead to better ability to produce force and stability through your positions. So if I kick in, set my hands up. So set your hands up first, because it just makes it easier. That way you don't have to shuffle around afterwards. I'm going to get my pointer forwards. I'm going to grip in with my fingers. I'm happy with that shape and width of my arms. From there, I'm going to kick in, get myself to lockout. From there, break at the arms, tap the head, and lock myself out. So, we want to be creating that full press action. Obviously, again, you can add deficits to that and you can build yourself in from there. So that's your strict movement. From there, we want to be thinking about going into the kipping action. Now, kipping action obviously can be done from top, bottom, or you need to have top position and bottom position. It stays the same. Only difference that changes with the bottom position is that your legs start coming into a squatted shape. And literally think about squatting. Upside down thruster is actually probably a fairly good anecdote or concept to kind of play with to get yourself to understand where to be. So if I kick into the bottom position here, I'm going to point my fingers forward, everything's there. I'm going to deliberately place my head into the tripod. And if you're not comfortable kicking up to the full position, this can be a really good way to start to understand that kick up. The same thing, kick up. From there, I'm going to imagine that I come down from long, hips go against the wall. From there, I'm going to literally squat down the bottom. Now from here, I'm pulling my toes to my shins. That allows me to kick my heels vertically and utilize quads, as I just done there, as well as hips to get lockout. Where people go wrong is they point their toes, and it means they can only have access to their quads. They don't really get much access to the glutes. From there, I'm actually letting my knees come down towards my elbows. If you go out in front, typically you're more likely to have issues where you get pulled off the wall. Obviously I had to extend my legs there to come off the wall, and the closer you are to the wall, the more likely that's going to happen. So splitting the legs a little bit means that your center of mass stays closer to the wall. It means you're much less likely to fall off the wall. If you're less likely to fall off the wall, you're more stable. More stable just means better overall position, more comfortable as well. From that bottom position, what I'm going to do is I'm going to kick my heels to the roof really quite aggressively through quads and glutes, and as soon as I feel myself go weightless, I'm going to pop up. Now, you don't want to be thinking in the same way that you would with a thruster. You don't want to push early. If you're pushing and you're just kind of half committing to the leg kick, you're going to find it really, really hard to create that height. Whereas what we want to be able to do is create a really aggressive leg kick to get your head basically popping off the ground already, and then from there it's really, really easy to push the arms through. I'm going to quickly talk about coming down here as well. If I come down, as I'm coming down, I'm looking to create that break at the elbows and return to the head. But what I'm also going to try and do is go soft through the hips and the knees to drop myself straight down into that bottom position. Obviously, again, that's a more advanced shape. So to begin with, you can just bring your head down and go through, but I'm going to demonstrate both. So if I start at the bottom, so I can talk you through the kick up. Again, hands are in the place that I want them to be. I'm going to get my head down into the bottom shape. I'm going to kick myself up. From there, I'm going to tuck into the bottom shape. From there, I'm going to kick my heels to the roof aggressively. And then from there, I'm going to lock out. When I come back down, obviously I came off the wall a little bit there. When I come back down, obviously you can come back down into the straight leg position and then curl up if you feel like you need to take your time. Like that. Or I can come down and create almost a bouncing action by bending my legs early as I'm coming down. So if I kick up, come down, and see that time I bent early, which meant that I can actually string those reps together a lot quicker, but it also actually reduces the amount of stress that's on your neck. Now, final thing that we want to talk about is the pressure on the neck. So quite often people will get pain through necks or particularly around the head position, right near where it attaches into the head, or in and around the traps the next day, or worst case, they'll feel clicks or anything through their spine. So your spine is built to withstand more force as you go down. So your cervical spine up in here is quite small vertebrae, whereas your lumbar spine has big vertebrae. It means it's better at just supporting load. That ability to support load means you feel quite comfortable standing upright. When we flip ourselves upside down, it means that you've got a lot of your body weight sitting on the neck, particularly when you're sitting in an elongated state. Now obviously when you're doing a handstand, that's not the case because your weight is through your shoulders. It's fine, you can support load there. When you're talking about dealing with it on the head, it's still safe, it's still fine, as long as you stay stacked, because you have less room for error there. So big thing is make sure that your neck is sitting neutral and you're sitting on the top of your head, not sitting into this sort of position, which is common, particularly with ab mats because they're curved. It means it kind of push you into that shape. You're going to get a lot of tension through that vertebrae where the bend is happening. Or going the opposite way where you're tucking and going too far back, where you're actually flexing your spine in the opposite direction. Literally try and sit neutral and literally let the weight sit right on the top of the head. You should feel like there's a comfy spot there. Get used to it, practice it with headstands, because that's going to be a nice way just to build that control up. Okay, that's all our handstand push-up stuff. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you have any questions, flick us a message. Other than that, see you later.